I'm done with the holiday music for a while.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Caroline Stachowiak with the National Volunteer Fire Council. I'd like to welcome you to our discussion on how to help first responders manage stress during the holiday season. The holiday season, as we know, can be a difficult time for firefighters, EMS providers, and their families. And this year, of course, we have the added stress of the pandemic. Fortunately, we're here today to talk about positive strategies that you and your crew can use to manage that stress. Before we begin, I'll do a quick introduction of the NVFC, introduce our panelists, and go over the format for the event. So the NVFC is the leading nonprofit membership association representing the interests of the volunteer fire, EMS, and rescue services. One of the programs that I work on is the Share the Load program, which provides tools and resources for individual responders and department leaders related to behavioral health. You can learn more about this program and access our resources at nvfc.org/help. And now I'm happy to introduce our panelists. We have Ali Rothrock, who is a volunteer firefighter, EMT, and CEO of On the Job and Off. Hi, Ali. We have Jeff Dill, who is the founder of the Firefighter Behavioral Health Alliance and retired captain of the Palatine Rural Fire Protection District in Illinois. Hello, Jeff.
Hello, Caroline. Hello, everyone.
And last but not least, we have Hersch Wilson, who is an author, a speaker, a consultant, and a 30-year fire service veteran. Hi, Hersch.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. It's an important topic.
We're glad to have you all. All right. So just to introduce the format of this event, our discussion will last about an hour, depending on how many questions we receive. I do have a few questions for the panelists already, but we are also taking questions from the audience. If you do have any questions, please write those into the comments section under this video. And if we do not get to your questions today, please email our communications coordinator, Matthew Odom, for follow-up at matthew@nvfc.org. And we'll put his email in the video description. All right, well, let's start the discussion. So Ali, we will start with you. As I mentioned earlier, the holiday season can be stressful for emergency responders and their families. Can you explain why we tend to feel increased stress during this season?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, there's regular holiday stress, and then there's holiday stress in 2020, which are completely different things. So normal holiday stress is, there's financial stress, there's stressful family dynamics, people who even might deal with seasonal affective disorder, things that are just harder around the holidays like that. And I even know from some of my own experiences in the emergency services, calls that are tragic feel even more tragic around the holidays. I remember a call that I was on with my SISM team where 2 little kids died in a house fire, and it was like the week before Christmas, and I'll never forget seeing presents addressed to them under the Christmas tree in their house. And so that would have been terribly sad, not at Christmas time, but around that time it was just that much more tragic. And then of course we have the pandemic. We can't celebrate the way that we want to. We can't see people the way that we want to. There's just really no end to the reasons that we could feel stressed. We might feel grief over missing family members that we can't see, that we can't mourn, that we can't feel the way that we're feeling because of everything else that's going on. So on top of all of that, you have the normal stress that comes with being a first responder, which is disrupted family time, disrupted sleep, that chronic exposure to trauma, all that stuff that normally can cause us stress is really heightened around this time.
Thank you so much, Ali. Hersch or Jeff, do you have anything to add, or we'll move on to our next question?
I'm good. That was great.
Yeah, Ali hit the nail on the head. So it's
perfect. Perfect. So I will ask an open question to all of you. As we're headed into this season, which can be stressful even in the normal year, as Ali said, what are some ways that we can take care of ourselves in times of increased stress?
Go ahead, Hersch.
Thanks, Jeff. I think there are a couple things. And the first thing to think about is, and I've become a much bigger proponent of this since March, and that is self-care. We have to take care of ourselves. Before we can take care of others, we have to take care of ourselves. And this is really true now in this time of just increased stress. And when you look at our brothers and sisters working in the hospitals and those who are doing a lot of COVID care, it is an extraordinarily stressful time. So what I've learned to do is a couple of strategies. I walk, simple things, like I walk my dogs every morning religiously. I get out there at dawn and we walk, and I kind of let my dogs, who are like old souls, lead the way. They're mindful, they're in this moment, and it allows me to kind of take my stress level down and kind of prepare for the day. And I think there are a number of things, we'll talk about them later, but we all need to have a stress plan, a proactive plan for dealing with our stress. And I think that is critical now, and especially going into the holidays.
I think many times due to stress, we put so much stress on ourselves to try to release and reduce our stress. And that causes more anxiety for us on a daily basis. In 2018, we did a survey of 972 respondents in a 5-day period on many things, stress, depression. And we found out in regard to stress that 74% of our brothers and sisters struggle with stress and anxiety on a daily basis. And that number just, it blew me away. And things that they were, of course, dealing with are not only what's in life, but what's on the job. Just the work environment, whether it's harassment, whether it is things of management, unions, associations, injuries, loss of duty, time, loss of a member, all this stress and anxiety compiled to what most human beings have in life. And I think we get so stressed out of trying to reduce our stress that we can't do it. And that makes us struggle even more. And so, yeah, self-care, absolutely. I agree 100%. But also, we need to go talk to people. I'm a firm believer in counseling. And counseling is not necessarily talking to a professional. It means, hey, I can call a chaplain. I can call my peer support, my CISM team. Just find someone, because everyone's heard about resiliency. And to me, in my FBHA world, resiliency starts with talking. Talk. And that is key for us to help reduce our stress.
I think that's great. That was really well said. Thank you. I want to add one other thing and talk about how we deal with stress badly. The IAFF did a survey a couple of years ago, and 50% of their respondents said they binge drink monthly, at least once a month. So kind of the normal way firefighters from the old school have dealt with stress has been by self-medicating. And that is just a spiral down that we need to find alternatives to.
Great, thank you. Jeff, we have a question for you. I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about cognitive disconnect and internal size up. Would you be able to explain what these terms mean and the roles that they can play in stress management?
Yeah, and cognitive disconnect. Remember, I went back, got my master's degree when I was a battalion chief to become a licensed counselor, and they have different terms. I formed the cognitive disconnect one. In our world, and let's give an example, okay? Now let's talk about anger, because we know that there's anger within us as first responders. And cultural brainwashing and things. Cultural brainwashing is just, we have within our society, our culture, we have to act in certain ways once we put this uniform on. And it's brave, strong, courageous, give help, don't ask for help. But let's look at cognitive disconnect in this way as well. And that is that we put this uniform on, we go to the store and people, oh, thank you for what you do. You're fabulous. You're wonderful. Our children want to be like you. You have parades and, you know, you're throwing out candy and the water pistols and everyone loves you. And then you go home to the person who knows you the best and doesn't place you on that pedestal. And so what happens then is that cognitive disconnect is we start basing our actions on our emotions and reality goes out the window. And so maybe in the heat of an argument, this firefighter starts thinking to his, you know, his partner, spouse, loved one, hey, why can't you treat me like John Q. Public? And they get so angry to the point that they pull out a gun or whatever it is, and they shoot their loved one and then themselves. We've had out of our 1,585 suicides that we have validated in the fire and EMS world and dispatchers, we've had 61 that are murder-suicides. And we base these things on that anger. And so for us, cognitive disconnect is basing our decisions on our emotions at the time, whether it's PTSD, the stress and anxiety, depression, jealousy, anger, whatever it is at that moment. And so what we try to do we talk about in our workshops is that we all need to practice what we call internal size up. I created this term many years ago. In fact, we named a workshop after it. And internal size up to me means we need to ask ourselves on a daily basis, why am I acting this way? Why am I feeling this way? And the best thing that we can do is listen to others because they see us a lot better than we will ever see ourselves. And that's can be difficult because with that cultural brainwashing, we have expectations from our brothers and sisters we work with, the communities we serve, the traditions of the fire service say this is how you're supposed to act. And when you're struggling, either personally, professionally, it's very difficult to go down these roads, whatever they're struggling with, depression or whatever it is, all alone. So, you know, cognitive disconnect just means, hey, we have to understand our emotions before they get to a place where we make a bad decision of either killing others or killing ourselves, and then doing that internal size up on a daily basis. And we have a workshop where we do with families, spouses and partners. We tell them, hey, do those internal size up together and make this a partnership, make it something that's less scary. And so just ask yourself on a daily basis, why am I acting this way? Why am I feeling this way?
Great advice, Jeff. And since you mentioned families, we'll move on to our next question. Families can be an important source of support for first responders, but it can also be a challenge to balance the fire service responsibilities, your family, and then maybe a day job as well. And this question goes out to any of you. What are some ways that we can focus on keeping those family relationships strong and tapping into that important support system?
I think one of the biggest things is having an open line of communication with your family. If it's a spouse or it's parents or whoever your support system is there, having enough communication there to let them know when you're in a place where you feel like you're tapped emotionally, or if you come back from running a really bad call, make sure that the environment exists in your house where you can say that, where your loved one or your co-parent will know, okay, they don't have anything to give right now. They need to sit out in the garage or take a drive for 30 minutes to kind of reset after that, to have that open line of communication. But I think for the first responder, it's important that they're also open to hearing what their spouse or their partner needs from them in return. Maybe their partner has some things to say, you know, this is an area that I feel needs work, or here's an area where I don't feel like we're connecting or we're not communicating. It's important for us as first responders to be open to how our job or our hobby is affecting the people that we love. And it's important that we're open to hear how that's affecting them, to know where there are even places to work on. It's important not to assume just because someone's quiet or someone doesn't have anything to say that there's not stuff that needs to be talked about there.
Well, yeah, if I could agree, and if I could chime in a couple things. I'm lucky in that my wife was a firefighter EMT before I was. So she understood what the vocation entailed. But when I was like in my 4th year and I was a super gung-ho firefighter, a paramedic pulled me aside and said, you have to remember your priorities. Your family comes first, right? The fire department is second. And you have to keep those priorities straight so that you can't, sometimes you can't go on a call, or sometimes you need to make sure that you sit down and explain to your family what's going on, why you feel that way. But you have to keep your priorities sorted. And I think sometimes especially when we've done multiple calls and we're tired, we're exhausted, we lose a sense of what our priorities are. And that becomes really important, especially now going into the holidays. What are your priorities? And that'll help guide your actions.
Education is absolutely key. When we looked at our data and saw, well, the number one known reason in our data for fire and EMS and taking their lives is marital and family relationships. And so we have to, we see we got a guest in the back there. We have to educate the family members on what our job is about so that they understand it and how it affects them at home. And family members, very importantly, means their children. And I'm a firm believer that all first responders, I started as a volunteer before I went career. I'm a firm believer that you need to talk to your children about what your job entails and why at times you might act the way that they do, and that it's okay for them to ask you, hey, why are you acting this way? And so education is a key component on that in families, and putting together behavioral health programs for your department. Make sure that you include educating families and children about the job and how it affects the home life as well.
Yeah, I think that just to add on to exactly right, I think the worst thing we can do is be in denial about it and not talk about it. And when your daughter or son ask you, what's wrong, not to tell them the truth, not to kind of explain what's going on, and then they don't know what's going on.
Well, it's important. One of the most important slides that we use in our workshops is that we as first responders have to learn how to listen. And that's role reversal for us, because we go on the scenes, we're asking the questions. Ma'am, it was a possible overdose. Was you intent to kill yourself? Did you, this and that? We ask everything and anything that we can to gain that information. Yet when we go home, it's very difficult for us to listen to what those issues are during our home life and the way that we bring the job home. And I don't care who you are. And I laugh at people, fire and EMS, when they say, oh, I leave everything at the station. Yeah, right. I don't believe so. I've lived that life for 26 years, and I think my wife can attest. There are things that I bring home, whether I admit it or not.
Right.
And so, yes, that open line of communications of not only talking to them about your emotions and things or whatever you're feeling, but also learning how to listen.
Great points from all three of you. Thank you. And Jeff, you mentioned behavioral health programs, and the NVFC encourages having those resources available to support fire service members. We offer some of those tools through the Share the Load program. Jeff, I know Firefighter Behavioral Health Alliance also offers some different tools and resources. But let's talk about why it's important for a department to focus on behavioral health, to bring that conversation up, and why leaders should consider starting an initiative such as this.
When we validate a firefighter suicide or EMS suicide, the validation process, like I said, is we talk to the chiefs. And the number one thing they always tell me is they never realized their members were struggling with signs and symptoms. And I would say, well, how would you know if you haven't had training, if you don't know what to look for or how to have resources? And it's key. Education and resources is imperative. And the NVFC with your directory of behavioral health, and I'm sure you'll talk about it in a few minutes as well. But to have those resources, because we can all, every one of us on this panel can go out there and say, hey, stand up, get the help, but who are we sending our people to? And I have some great counselor friends, but I would never would have sent them to any counselor that didn't understand some aspect of our world. Now, that doesn't mean they had to be a firefighter or EMS or a paramedic, but maybe they had a parent or a sibling and they could understand the stressors that we go through as first responders. And there's a ton of them. And I don't think we need to list them all, because we all here on this live Facebook know and understand what those stressors are. But having the resources of training your employee assistance programs, training your counselors and chaplains, having counselors within your community that understand what we do. And so very, very important for every organization. And I would have to say the one positive thing about COVID is that it's opened up the telehealth, so that our brothers and sisters can sit in their house and they can talk to a counselor across their state who works with first responders and have counseling sessions through the computer.
Something else that I've seen too in my work with mental health programs across the US and in Canada is that, you know, chiefs and leaders, they, not to generalize, but some think that a behavioral health program is only needed after a major incident. That if there's a school shooting in their town, then now, like, that's their line of then we would consider having some sort of mental health help was after something like that. But we all know that by the nature of our job, it requires us to be chronically exposed to trauma, like little drops in a bucket. That cumulative stress adds up. And of course, these unique big stressors like, you know, incidents of mass violence or natural disasters or things like that, of course, need to be dealt with, and resources need to be provided in a new way. But just because you haven't had something like that in your town, and God forbid you don't, doesn't mean that there's not still things that need to be addressed and talked to. And everybody deals with stress in different ways. And like we have all said, how would you know how someone, if they're struggling, because we are taught to not vocalize that. We are taught that our problems are second and we are there to problem solve. And so our problems almost like, I'll deal with that later, and then later never comes. So behavioral health programs, resources, education is crucial, no matter if you run 100 calls a year or 10,000 calls a year, you know, city, rural, whatever. Everybody has that ability to be exposed to trauma, and resources need to be built in to help address that.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think the biggest probably thinking mistake you can make is that it'll never happen here, right? As if you're a chief or an officer, just that idea that, you know, I know my folks and it would never happen here. That is a fallacy. We've got to stamp that thinking out, because we have a small department. I've been around it for 30 years, usually 20 members. We've had two suicides and one attempted suicide. So it can happen anywhere. And we were just we did not have the training. We didn't know what to look for. So it's imperative that as officers that we really use behavioral health as a foundational training, and they're always retouching it all year long.
Yeah, buy-in from the top is absolutely imperative. I can't tell you the amount of workshops I've been to, and they said, man, great workshop, Jeff. I just wish our chief officers would attend. So what message do you send to your people? You have these wonderful members that are trying to form peer support teams and CISM teams, and yet they don't get the funding from their department. They don't put money aside. And we all know, we've all been there. And if a department starts to cut, where are they going to cut from? Well, within training. And what's going to be in training? Well, mental health. And like Hersch said, well, we haven't had anything, you know, thank God, knock on wood, but that doesn't stop. I mean, I have in our data, I have departments that lost people with two people within a week, you know, several of these departments like this. And volunteer, I'm a firm believer. I believe it's more difficult as a volunteer, because right after that call, you're heading home to your family or you're going back to your job. Yep. And it just festers in your mind all day long. And the very same for dispatchers. You know, they end that call because first responders are there and those calls are playing out in their mind. Geez, I wonder what happened. I wonder what's going on. So, you know, one of the things we talk about is reducing stress and anxiety, especially for our dispatchers, is incorporate them into a phone call to let them know how that call ended. so their mind just doesn't play over and over. I wonder what happened. I wonder what happened. And we all do those things. So just a few things.
That's great.
All right, thank you all. Hersch, we have a question for you here. I know that you wrote an article for the MBFC a few years ago about building resiliency and some different practices that firefighters and EMS providers can engage to help cope with their stress. Could you explain what resiliency means? We've used that word a few times today, and then some examples of how those responders can help to build that resiliency.
Sure. So resilience is basically, in kind of layman's terms, the ability to bounce back from hard times or tragedy. And it is innate in all of us, but we all often need to train to bring up resilience in ourselves. So there's this wonderful paper written by Margaret Haglund about the 6 keys to resilience for first responders. And the first thing we need to do, and I mentioned this, is everybody, when you come into this vocation, you need to have a way of dealing with stress. You can't just wait for it to happen. You can't just say, I can get through anything, but you need to be proactive about some sort of methodology for dealing with stress. I walk, I do yoga, there's meditation, there is all kinds of ways to deal with stress. Understanding what stress is an important part of that, because I think a lot of us don't really take the time to say, what is stress? And then when we feel horrible, we feel anxious, we don't know that it's kind of a natural part of the job, and we just kind of go on, it must be me, right? So we need to understand, it's like getting the flu. We need to understand the process. Secondly, and I'm just reiterating what Ali and Jeff have talked about, physical activity, hugely important to have a physical activity regime. It doesn't mean that you have to be a truckie and go to the gym every day and lift a lot of weights, but walking, jogging, 25 minutes a day, physical hardiness develops mental and emotional hardiness. The next thing that Jeff talked about, it's really important to be in the community. It's really important to have and to be able to reach out to people and talk, right? Firefighters, career firefighters, when they have a bad call, as Jeff was talking about, they go back to the station, they have the opportunity to debrief and talk about the call. Volunteers go home, right? And if they don't have a formal way to talk, that can lead to problems. So the idea of community is super important for us in terms of building resilience and being just resilient people. The other one is what we call a moral compass. And people who are religious tend to deal better with trauma and stress than people who don't have a moral compass. Although you can have a moral compass in a secular sense too. But knowing that you're here for a purpose, that you're here for a reason, that you're doing good in the world is really important, rather than kind of having a nihilistic point of view. So those are kind of the ones that I really think about. The last one would be what we call cognitive flexibility. And that's the ability to take an event and see it in different ways, right? Not get caught in, this is the worst thing that happened. I've never seen anything like this. It's terrifying, it's tearing me up. But to be able to step back and kind of say, and the way I think about it, it's like when you go to a bad call, my mantra is, this is not my emergency. This is somebody else's emergency. It's not my emergency. So to be able to reframe events like that. I think the final thing I'll mention is that an optimistic and point of view is really important for the fire service. Optimistic people tend to see problems as being short-term rather than this is going to be way it's going to be forever. They tend to bounce back quicker. So being kind of optimistic and having a sense of humor. We all know in the fire service, we have a very, very dark sense of humor, but that is critical for us in terms of it brings people to you. It breaks the ice. It allows us to really communicate at a deeper level about what's going on. And even though we don't use that sense of humor on with the outside world, it's important for us to keep that going as first responders. So those are kind of key things that we can work on and develop. And I'll post the paper on my website and link it to the NVFC at the end of the day.
Hey, Hersch, do you know what one of my self-cares is I play pickleball. Now, what else would a guy, Jeff Dill, play but pickleball, right?
Exactly. I know, but it's like understanding that we are going to have anxious and stressful times as first responders. And no one teaches you this in the academy, but you got to have a plan. And if it's pickleball or if it's walking or whatever it is, I have a plan for dealing with my stress.
Right.
And I think people think they're somehow like the special one that's never going to feel negative effects of stress, or they think all that behavioral and mental health stuff is great, but it's never going to apply to me because I'm always going to deal with stress perfectly. And what we see happen is people are stuck in that mindset of it's not going to be me that needs help. It's not going to be me that's going to feel overstressed. And then their stress becomes this enormous elephant because it was not dealt with for so long when it could have been dealt with when it was this big. Yeah. And another thing that I think is important is to mention that stress isn't always bad. That, when our pager goes off or when the beeps go off at the station, our heart rate increases, our blood starts pumping, we get chemicals in our body to help us do the things that we need to do. That's stress. That's good stress. And then when the call is over, those chemicals leave our body and we go back to kind of our baseline where we were before the call. That's stress in a positive way. And I think we can all relate to what that feels like. And it kind of makes it easier to think if you're feeling those things, that anxiety, that rushing of the heart rate, when there's not a call, when there's not something external that's happening to kind of warrant that, that's when stress becomes a negative thing. And so that was helpful for me to learn many years ago, that stress isn't always bad and that no one is going to be not stressed all the time. That's going to happen as we are human beings and experience the world. But like we've been saying, what are you doing with that? Are you pushing it aside and saying, I'm going to deal with that later? Or are you saying, I'm going to get up and walk my dog this morning because I know that puts me in the right headspace? I am somebody who starts every single day by writing. This bookcase right here is full of almost 100 journals I've written every day since 2005. That's a non-negotiable start to my day. And so I know that puts me in a great headspace. And if I don't do that, I'm going to be more reactive to stuff throughout the day. So that's something I think is important to remember, is that no one here is special. No one here is above feeling that stress. It's what are we going to do? How are we going to meet that feeling when it comes?
That's awesome. Is a little bit what you said, Ali, reverse psychology, that, the stress is not going to hit me and this and that. Or maybe they're thinking, man, I'm really stressed out, but I don't see anyone else. So it must be my issue. I'm the one who's got the problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So they don't want to say anything. Absolutely. So it's very difficult. And I don't know, none of us are, and I shouldn't say this, none of us, but I hate it when people say, hey, Jeff, you're an expert in this field. No, I'm not. If I was an expert, I'd be able to solve these issues.
Oh, yeah. No.
And I tell people that right then and there when they say that. All we're doing is we're trying. We're listening to our brothers and sisters. We're bringing this information to you for you to disseminate which one works for you.
Right.
And just like a counselor, when the firefighters or EMS call me and they're looking for a counselor in the area, I'll call and vet 3 or 4 of them and say, now you have to call them and see which one works for you.
Right.
And that's all Hersch and Ali and I can do here, is say, hey, these are the things that we face, your brothers and sisters face. Find out which one works for you.
Right. And that's where the leadership setting the tone is so important. Like you said, Jeff, I have been on calls where every single person is just brokenhearted inside, yet everybody goes back to what they were doing before the call started. The chief goes back into their office, nobody talks, and that's the end of that call verbally, except every single person is taking that call home with him. So it's up to the leadership, if nobody else, to set that tone, to normalize the reaction that everybody's having, that everybody thinks they're the only one having it. So it takes someone who's willing to actually lead, because leading isn't just about like making sure your trucks are staffed and making sure the lights stay on. It's about making sure that your people are a cohesive unit that can at least have that communication to say, wow, that really reminded me of of my daughter, or that person looked like my mom, or I have so much going on at home and that just felt like the very last straw. Like I just feel kind of spent. Those lines of communication don't happen by accident. They happen by someone setting that tone of saying, this is how we're going to do things here. And we're going to talk about these things openly.
And they
That's
might
right.
have to follow. They might have to follow up a couple days later because
Sure.
we
Yeah.
all process things differently.
Absolutely. You might not know you're struggling until a week
Right.
later. And you're like, I can't get that out of my brain. Yeah.
Right.
I think, a part of this goes to, and we've talked about it a lot, about the fire culture. And my daughter, who's a family practice doctor in Minnesota, has this T-shirt that says, "What wine goes with destroying the patriarchy?" Right? And it's the same with the fire service. I mean, we have a patriarchy in the fire service. We have an old way of doing things that has some good, but a lot of it has always been about suppressing feelings and suppressing emotions and not talking about it. And we need to, in an evolutionary way, really work against that. And that goes to leadership. That goes to new leaders who are emerging in the fire service, who are a different generation. They need to step up and do things differently. And I think that's the only way, by really working with the culture, that we're going to make the kind of big strides in mental health that we need.
Right. And that leadership then has to say, hey, guess what? We're going to start it in our academies.
Yep.
And we're going to do more than just 15 minutes on behavioral health and PTSD and suicide. We're going to spend some time on it. And so many academies that I've seen and visited say, well, we have a certain amount of hours that we have to fit in, the
Right.
state requirements. Well, then the states need to change it as well. Then they
Yep.
need to add additional time and not just an hour to address what you might see in this job and how it will affect you.
Absolutely. And I was thinking as a simple thing that for the chiefs and the officers listening, a simple thing that we can do is by talking about how we feel after a bad call. Leaders go first. And so if I can step into that space and say, that was a really bad call, here's how it affected me, here's what I'm going to do about it. And if I can lead that way, that creates a space for others to say, yeah, I don't feel very good about it either, and I need help.
And I think, Hersch, that's been our biggest change these past 10 years. Our senior fire and EMS standing up and saying, hey, if I'm struggling, then chances are you might as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, we've talked a lot about leadership and how leadership can sort of start these conversations and these programs and these behavioral health initiatives. Do you all have any advice for a department or someone in a department whose leadership, isn't showing that support, and how they can help get the leadership on board?
I apologize. My internet died. That's where I was.
I'm glad to have you back,
Welcome
Ali.
To answer your question, I run into that a lot. People email me all the time and say, we have this, and this problems. We've had these calls. No one's talking about it. Like, we're all talking about it, but the leadership won't do anything. And something that I've seen work well in that situation, it probably doesn't apply everywhere, but I think a lot of times when leadership isn't on board, it's coming from a place of they don't know what to do and they don't want to do the wrong thing, and they feel overwhelmed by everything that a behavioral health program could be. And what I've seen work is to tell them what other departments are doing. Here is what such and such department has done, or some organizations that have had incidents of mass violence, mass shootings that have happened. Here's the resources that they brought in, and they had, stuff at 369 and the 1 year anniversary, after all those months after. Here's what other departments have done. And I found that takes the unknown or the overwhelming piece out of it, is to say, start here. Start by giving, letting your people know about the Share the Load hotline. Maybe have Jeff come in to talk, have this person to come in to talk, and just kind of give it little by little to show, here's what you can do. And it stops being so overwhelming. I found that to work kind of well.
I think the only thing I would add is, in that situation, it goes back to what we talked about earlier. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. If your department is not providing support, it's important that you take the initiative to take care of yourself and do the stuff that we've been talking about.
You know, we've consulted with major departments and smaller departments, and it is amazing how very little knowledge they have of how to put together a behavioral health program.
Mm.
And like I said, and I tell them, don't beat yourself up because this is new to us. This is all new to us, but we all have to start it from the volunteer. For us, it's 12 different points that you need to have, for a behavioral health program. But if you're a small little volunteer department, then concentrate, especially on your resources, and maybe some assembly of a peer support team, someone that your people can go to talk to, or find, like I said, those resources that they can go to. It's different for every organization, no doubt about it. And if anyone wants to contact us, I can send you the templates of things that we can do to help you.
All right, thank you all. Well, we've talked a lot about stress in the holiday season and what we can do. Do you all have any advice for how we can set ourselves up for a healthy 2021?
Not a clue. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, yeah, get really good at just rolling with it.
Yeah. Okay.
One thing we've learned this year is to maybe not have a ton of expectations, or set your expectations only on things you can control, which is basically yourself and your reactions to things. So it's things that you can implement, like walking every morning, writing, seeing friends in a safe way, those things that we can control. At the start of 2020, I was supposed to be in like 30 different places by this time this year. And I got to 1 in February, and that was it. So for 2021, I've just released all expectations. And so there's no more anxiety on, is this going to happen, or is it, just assume that it's not. And then if it does, that's a good thing. So for me, it's about just kind of focusing on what I can control, what I can do to, have fulfillment in my life, and just what I know. Because seriously, who knows what 2021 is going to be? We just don't know.
And I would add to that, because I think that's dead on. We understand what you can control, let go of what you can't control. But I think also that we lose perspective. And I always go back to the story my grandmother told me during the Second World War, when on D-Day, right? There were 12,000 Americans in uniform, and they started D-Day. And again, that was not a foregone conclusion that we were going to be victorious. And General Eisenhower actually had 2 speeches. One speech if the landings were successful, one if they're not. But for the next 8 months, right, my grandmother had a map of Europe, and she would take a push pin and put the pins where the American troops were. And that was a time of enormous uncertainty. And no one knew what was going to happen, right? And the whole country was unified and sucked into the sense of, we don't know what's going to happen. And they made enormous sacrifices. And I always try to think about what it would be like to live in that time, right? And I compare it to now. And the couple things I know is that we're the same people, right? They call it the greatest generation because the Second World War was their test. Well, now this is our test, right? And we have the resilience, we have the strength to get through it. And part of it is remembering our history, remembering our ancestors and what they went through. And I think about my grandmother again. She was born in 1900. She went through the First World War, the flu epidemic of 1819, the Great Depression, the Prohibition. My grandfather was actually running illegal liquor in Kentucky. That's a whole other story. The Red Scare, the polio scare, all these things, they survived, right? And they made it through. We're the same people. We will get through this. And I think we need to believe in ourselves and understand that. And then, as Ali said, it's day by day, right? It's day by day. I have no idea what next year is going to be like.
I love that perspective. Thanks, Hersch.
Yeah.
I think there was a question Stephen wanted to know, how do we get through the winter? And Ali is right. We need to take each day, but that doesn't mean we can't pre-plan. That doesn't mean we can't look into the future and set goals for our department. This is what we're trying to do. So you do the day by day. So you contact the share the load. You start building your resources within your community for your members to help them out with the stress and anxiety, and their family members, not just the members, but then their family members. So there's things that you can do on a day-to-day basis, but then you can start pre-planning the future. Hey, you know what, come to springtime, maybe we'll start looking into creating a behavioral health program. Maybe we'll start having counselors or chaplains ride with us that want to help us. So, like I said, we don't want to be overwhelmed. We as first responders, we react very quickly to calls that are thrown at us in a heartbeat. And there's nothing wrong with that. So this, within our own personal issues and our own stress and anxiety, take each day by day. Don't start thinking, what if? If you play that what if game, no one wins. Well, what if this happens? What if this? And it just unfortunately drives you crazy. So try not to do that what if this. Live day by day, start pre-planning for the future as well.
Great, thank you all so much. So before we wrap up, I will give each of you an opportunity if you'd like to provide any final thoughts on our topic today.
Thanks
Sure.
everybody for tuning in.
Go ahead, Ali.
Thanks to the NVFC for letting us talk about this topic. I mean, it's not been that long that this has even been something that people are willing to hear about, to put time into. So I'm just grateful for the opportunity to share about it, and for all the people who hopefully benefited from what we had to say.
Of course, we're happy to have you all.
I'd like to just go back to what Jeff said early on, and that it's important to realize you're not alone. And I mean this in two ways. We have a community of first responders, a brother and sisterhood. And you can lean on them for help, right? You can call people up and say, hey, I just need to talk. Take people out to, well, you can't take people out to lunch, but you can do a virtual lunch. Virtual lunch. But I think the other thing is that it's important to be proactive about reaching out to people in the department, right? Call people, find out how they're doing, right? Even if they don't want to talk, it's important to keep the lines of communication open and to really kind of emphasize the sense of community that we already have on the fire department. Be there for people.
I've, like I said, I've been doing this for 10 years, and the men and women that I have met have just been absolutely incredible. I've worked very closely with the NVFC, and I'm deeply honored the way that they've accepted FBHA many, many years ago. And so we will always stand by your side. And when you start having podcasts and Zooms and Facebooks like this, it helps people. It helps people understand that they're not alone in this thing that we call 2020 and COVID and stress and anxiety, and that we can share and help each other, pass it along, talk. And it is important. And I mentioned it before, Hersch has mentioned it. I know Ali has. Talk to people. Do not try to take these issues on by yourselves. And I've had my own PTSD from my granddaughter years and years ago. And it's a long, lonely journey when you try to walk it by yourself and thinking, well, I can't say anything because, I'm the battalion chief, I'm the founder of FBHA, and I'm the husband, the grandfather, the father. It's a rough road. So please reach out. We've said that for 10 years now. Reach out. Any one of us on this panel here will help you. Walk the walk with your brothers and sisters. Make sure that you take care of yourself. Make sure you take care of your families. It is a moment in time. And if we can just reflect on, if we can get through this, and I tell people, write down 3 names with phone numbers on a piece of paper and put it in your wallet. And that moment when that crisis seems to hit so hard, don't reach for the bottle, don't reach for the gun or whatever, reach for that wallet with that number and say, I need some help. And our brothers and sisters, we need to be there for them to walk that walk.
Absolutely. Remember, the Lone Ranger is a myth.
Yep.
All right. Well, it looks like we don't have any more questions from the audience. I know there was a question about a support hotline for first responders. So that hotline or that call center is available on the NVFC Share the Load program. That's nvfc.org/help, and you will find that resource there. You will also find a new directory of behavioral health professionals, as Jeff was mentioning. It's always good to talk to someone. So that list includes local providers who are equipped and ready to support you, the first responder, with your needs. And I will also mention that all three of our panelists, Jeff, Hersch, and Ali, have done webinars with us. Those webinars are available on our virtual classroom site. They are free. So if you have a chance, please check them out there. I want to thank our panelists again, of course, for their insight this afternoon, as well as everyone who joined us on the Facebook Live event. We will include links to On the Job and Off, that's Ali's website, Firefighter Behavioral Health Alliance, that's Jeff's website, and we will include Hersch's website as well. And of course, the Share the Load program in the video's description. Just as a reminder, if you do have any questions after the presentation, please contact Matthew Odom at matthew@nvfc.org. And I'd like to thank you all again and have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thank
Take care.
you.